So today's topic is Sri Ramakrishna and Interspirituality. Interspirituality is a term that is becoming more and more popular among enlightened spiritual seekers working for interfaith harmony, interfaith dialogues, and so on. The term itself was coined by a Catholic monk, an author whose name is Wayne Robert Teasdale. Perhaps he meant by this term a kind of universal approach to spirituality, an approach to religion from a universal spiritual point of view. The spiritual reality inherent in the whole creation and inherent in all religious traditions. That is what he really meant. Now, the main problem that we are confronting in modern times is the reality of conflicts and dissimilarity of religions and the need for a unity and harmony which goes beyond these diversities. There's a need, it's a matter of human survival, there's a need to find out some interconnecting link that puts together, that goes beyond, that looks beyond these diversities. That's the need. But the reality is, if you look at religions from a very superficial point of view, the diversities, dissimilarities, and conflicts outweigh any kind of harmony and unity. See, look at people belonging to different religious traditions. The rituals are different. The way they pray may be different. And in many cases, the food habits, customs, conventions, everything is different. Then where is the unity? Swami Vivekananda looked upon religion from a very universal perspective. He said, every religion has some primitive secondary details. At the same time, behind and beyond these apparent conflicts and diversities, the secondary details, there are some underlying universal spiritual principles. If you take this perspective, you find every religion is an approach to the same spiritual goal. Swami Vivekananda was a student, a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. And historically, if you look at the evolution of interfaith harmony and even comparative religion, you find in Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, the very concept of interfaith harmony and interspirituality finds its full expression. I shall just quote one to begin with, just to give an idea of what Sri Ramakrishna said, and then we will approach the subject from a historical perspective. Sri Ramakrishna makes an interesting statement. Different creeds are but different paths to reach the same one God. Now, how can different religions be paths leading to the same goal? If I go to a church, you may go to a temple, another friend may go to a mosque or a synagogue. Prayers are different, books are different, creeds are different. Then how can all of them take you to one God. Sri Ramakrishna says, diverse are the ways that lead to the temple of Mother Kali, the Divine Mother, in Calcutta. Similarly, various are the paths that take men to the house of the Lord. Every religion is nothing but one of such paths. And then another angle, he says, as one can ascend to the top of a house by means of a ladder, a bamboo, a staircase, or a rope, so also diverse are the ways and means of approaching God. And every religion in the world shows one of these ways. Now, you look at this imagery. You want to climb to the top story, maybe the terrace of a building, top of the building. When we first try to climb the staircase, the steps, we may think that this is the only way to reach the top. Another person who may be using a rope may imagine, if he doesn't see the staircases, he will imagine this rope is the only means to reach the top. In modern times, if you can use a parachute, from a helicopter you can descend to the top of the terrace, and you may think that's the only way to do it. So long as we don't reach the top, so long as we are at the lower levels, we think our path, our means of climbing, reaching the top, is the only way. There is no other way. Sri Ramakrishna uses another much more telling simile elsewhere. See, suppose you are trying to reach a home, you are trying to enter a home. You first reach the gate. Maybe the gate and the walls may be made of bricks. At that time you think maybe the pathway, the staircase, the ground floor may be made of something else other than the bricks. But when we enter the gate, as we walk towards the home, we think, oh yes, in fact even the pathway is also made of the same bricks out of which the walls are made, maybe the gate also may be made. And when we enter the ground floor is also made of the same brick. And then you climb the staircase, reach the first floor, second floor, and the terrace. Finally, when you reach the terrace, you understand it's the same brick. The whole building, including the pathways, the gate, the walls, everything is made of the same brick. But remember, unless you reach the terrace, the top, you will be always have some doubt. Maybe the top floor could be made of marble, maybe wood, timber. Or when you reach the top story, before you reach the terrace, you may imagine maybe the terrace could be made of something else. And when you reach the terrace and you find it made of the same brick, then you find the whole structure is made of the same brick. But we can never be fully convinced of this truth till we reach the top ladder. Vivekananda says, of course he took his lessons from Sri Ramakrishna. He says, in religious life, there are 5 levels of evolution. When we start with the kindergarten of religious life, we start with rituals, ceremonies, external practices. I go to my church, you go to your synagogue, and maybe even within the church there are many denominations. Within the same community there are different types of temples. And within the same religion there are different types of liturgies, practices, ceremonies, and rituals. So, at that level, it's like entering the ground floor, or maybe the gate. We think this is the only thing about religion. It's like somebody who thinks, well, ground floor is the only thing, nothing beyond that. And Vivekananda says, beyond rituals and ceremonies, dissimilarities, disharmony, there is mythology, and then there is theology. At these levels, there could be some similarities between different religious traditions, between different faith systems. And when you reach philosophy, beyond rituals, ceremonies, mythology, and theology, when you reach philosophy, religious philosophy, there could be many points of similarity. And when you reach experience, it's like reaching the top of the building. Then you find, well, when it comes to experience, religion becomes spirituality, all diversities vanish, there is an evolution and growth from gross to subtle, from external to internal, from without to within, from the kindergarten to the University of Berkeley, like that, in spiritual life. Now, Sri Ramakrishna said, from the spiritual point of view, all religions are so many paths, so many equally valid means to reach the same goal. The goal is spirituality, and this spiritual and religion becomes spirituality when it reaches the experience level. Religion is only religion, and mind you, when you define religion as religions, devoid of spiritual content, it is much more divisive. There have been more bloodsheds, more wars and conflicts in the name of religion and in the name of God on behalf of faith systems than wars and conflicts among the atheists and agnostics. Till 20th century. In 20th century, we witnessed the emergence of Nazism, fascism, and the two other irreligious but equally destructive divisive forces, that is communism, socialism, and ultra-nationalistic tendencies. But before 19th century, all conflicts in the world, most of the major conflicts and wars in the world were fought in the name of religion, at least from 1st century AD onwards. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says, this problem can be solved only if you interpret religion not as rituals or mythologies or ceremonies, but as spirituality. And only from a spiritual point of view, you can see harmony and unity. Because spirituality is not expressed in words. Spirituality is not expressed in the language of rituals, ceremonies, theology or mythology or even philosophy. Spirituality cannot be expressed except through silence. The language of spirituality is silence, because the language of spirituality is the language of experience. And experience can only be experienced, can never be explained. There is an ancient Vedic statement, it comes in the 10th mandala of Rigveda, Antaya Bhuvadinam Anantaya Mukam. The infinite experience, its language is silence. Everything else could be expounded, written about, discussed and debated about. But experience can only be experienced. Now, I am coming to another point. Sri Ramakrishna did not reach this conviction that all religions are equally valid paths leading to the same goal by studying comparative religion or by participating in interfaith dialogues or interreligious discussions. He just practiced. He practiced different denominations, different traditions of Hindu, his own system, his own and inherited religion, Hinduism. And also he practiced Christianity, even Islamic faith system, and so many other well-known religious traditions of his time, without perhaps reading the major theological works of these religious traditions. And he reached the experience. That's because, to begin with, at the beginning of his spiritual life, he had a mystical experience where he experienced the basic unity of human existence. The whole humanity is one spiritual family. All diversities, all conflicts are only at the level of rituals, ceremonies, and other secondary details. And remember, sometimes we are not able to understand this spiritual unity because we give too much importance to the secondary details, the outer shells of religious faith systems. I am eating my way. So this is the only way to eat. I am a vegetarian. So unless you are a vegetarian, you cannot be spiritual. People will talk. Hitler was a vegetarian, not necessarily very spiritual. Everyone knows about him. Jesus was perhaps not a vegetarian. Buddha was not. They were great spiritual teachers. So food habits, for example, dress codes, the language you speak, the conventions, customs and traditions, the socio-anthropological, the cultural, the linguistic aspects of the people among whom a prophet is born. These differences sometimes outweigh, and these differences are sometimes emphasized beyond and above the universal spiritual teachings of different religious traditions. That's why there are conflicts in the name of religions. Instead of focusing on the inner universal spiritual truths of different sacred books, we stop with the external details and we fight over that. Actually, maybe in the history of world religions, the very idea that all religious systems, all paths are leading to the same goal, so long as we are sincere, honest, and truthful, so long as we practice great spiritual values, even atheists, non-believers can become spiritual. This idea is expressed in the most ancient religious book the world has seen. It belongs to almost 6th millennium BC in the Rigveda Samhita. There is a very grand statement in the Rigveda Samhita. Historically, it is very important. Indram mitram varunam agnirahu atho divyasas suparno garutman ekam sat vipra bagudha vadanti agnim yamam matarishwanamahu. The first line gives a list of different deities, faith systems, and spiritual and religious practices, conventions of those days. Then the second line says, Ekam Sat, reality is one. People call them by different names, use different words to express the same truth, but the reality is one. The same idea in 19th century, in the language of Sri Ramakrishna, is put differently. As Sri Ramakrishna says, as one and the same water is called by different names by different people belonging to different religious traditions, some calling it water in English, Vari may be Jalam in Sanskrit, Aqua may be in Latin, Pani in Hindi, all the languages that he was familiar with, perhaps Sri Ramakrishna uses. The same water is called by different names by people in hundreds of different languages. So also the same reality, the existence, knowledge, bliss, is invoked by some as God, by some as Allah, by some as Vishnu, by some as Father in heaven, Jehovah, and so on. So a statement that comes from Rig Veda, which belonged to 7th millennium BC, is put in the language of Sri Ramakrishna. The same water that you drink from this glass, you may call by different names, but when you drink it, it becomes an experience, and the experience, the same, the thirst is quenched. But remember, the one main problem and main point to remember is, till you reach experience, conflicts will continue, will remain. Till I drink this water and get the feeling the water quenches my thirst, I may perhaps foolishly believe that some people who call the same thing as jalam in Sanskrit, if they drink that, it will have a different experience. But when I drink this, when it becomes an experience, it becomes a spirituality, all problems are solved. So inter-religious conflicts can resolve only on the platform of spirituality, on the platform of experience. That's what Sri Ramakrishna taught. Now, there have been innumerable attempts in the history of human civilization by enlightened rulers, believers, and spiritual seekers to resolve inter-religious conflicts. Historically, the first attempt, organized attempt, was made by Acharya the Great, an emperor who lived in India in the 3rd century BC. Then there have been many attempts, at least within Christendom, there have been attempts to bring different denominations of Christianity under one umbrella, on the same platform. In 16th century, there was an attempt in India again by another emperor who invited Portuguese missionaries from Goa who had come there to spread Christianity, Muslim Sufis, Hindu saints and sages, Buddhists, and all of them were invited to his court, and then he made an attempt to evolve a concept of interspirituality, which did not succeed for one simple reason. He did not insist on the experience aspect of different religious traditions. He thought if he could put together different rituals, different belief systems from diverse religious traditions and put them all, a kind of eclecticism, he did not succeed because he did not emphasize the central theme of every religious tradition, namely experience and spirituality. In modern times, it is the spiritual ideal which serves as the platform for inter-religious harmony. So there are different approaches in inter-faith relationship. The highly exclusivistic approach, the defensive approach, mostly used by fundamentalists belonging to different religious traditions. Of course, they want to create an artificial universal religion by forcing all people to accept one religion, which is the opposite of, the antithesis of spirituality and spiritual unity of mankind. The other approach is a syncretic approach, where people may be persuaded to surrender their faith systems and accept another one, not through force or violence, but by showing the superiority through arguments or through material prosperity and so on. The most logical approach is the dialogical approach. In dialogical approach, people belonging to different religious traditions, they talk, they discuss, and they accept ideas from all religious traditions. There are positive, healthy, and helpful, and harmonizing and unifying spiritual ideas in all sacred books of the world. They can be exchanged, they can become the subject of discussion. But that also may not fully succeed But because there again, you stop at the theological and philosophical level. But Sri Ramakrishna emphasizes one point. There could be some points of harmony and unity at the philosophical, theological level. But the problem is every philosophical system can be defended and also can be attacked. A lawyer, a well-paid lawyer, a brilliant lawyer can argue for the right cause and also for the wrong cause. It is neutral. That's the problem. So dialogical approach is certainly a very healthy, creative and constructive path. But it is not foolproof because the emphasis is on logical soundness of this idea. And every logical idea can be countered at logical level. But Sri Ramakrishna emphasized, this is good. In fact, he himself encouraged. Sometimes, people belonging to different faith systems, Christianity, Islam, and also different traditions within Hinduism, used to come to Sri Ramakrishna and he used to encourage them, you discuss among yours of different systems. Sri Ramakrishna used to ask them. Then he would say, well, beyond all this, there is one principle, you should have devotion to God, you should lead a good moral life. But the central theme of his teachings was that at the experience level, when you really experience the essence of a religious tradition, then all differences, all conflicts vanish. That's why in Vedantic tradition, there's a perfect reconciliation between theology and mysticism. In fact, theology and philosophy become authentic when they are supported by experience. In Shankaracharya's commentaries on the Upanishad and Vedic literature, he goes about shouting a big slogan, Srutya, Yuktya, Swanubhutya. That is it. So he says, we should read books, Bible, Quran, Saint Avesta, maybe Dhammapada, Gita, Upanishad, all the different sacred books of the text we must read. Then he says we must understand. We must try to understand the meaning through contemplation and also using our own power of reasoning. Blind belief will not take you anywhere. Blind belief. We must understand and then believe. And then he says, that's not enough. See, if you can take an oath, well, I believe this, you don't become spiritual. You may become religious, and still you may continue your fight. So he says, beyond this expression of your allegiance to a faith system, this taking a formal oath, there is something that goes beyond that's superior. And that is the only criterion for spiritual authenticity. He says that is experience. Swanubhuti means one's own inner experience. And when you get this experience, all doubts vanish. Not till then. So Sri Ramakrishna says, if a sincere, honest, spiritual seeker practices the supreme sacred teachings of his or her religious tradition, sincerely, earnestly, then you don't require an intermediary. You don't require a priest or any intermediary to take you to God's presence. God's doors will be open if you open your heart. So, every religion at its highest level becomes or should become experience. And when religion becomes experience, it is spirituality. And every religious tradition has this spiritual content in all their teachings and sacred texts. Once we reach this level, this experience level, then all conflicts will vanish. In a way, Sri Ramakrishna's concept of interspiritual unity or spiritual unity of mankind, really, if you look at it from the standpoint of the evolution of religious doctrines and religious philosophy, is a new spiritual paradigm. A new spiritual paradigm which resolves once for all conflicts. That's why you may remember when Vivekananda, that's something everyone knows, Swami Vivekananda came to this country in 1893, and you all read in Swami Vivekananda's life that when he delivered the Chicago address, 6,000 people got up and clapped their hands, applauded him when he called them sisters and brothers of America. You find that incident. Now, what is the spiritual implication of this event? We may imagine that it was Swami Vivekananda's his rhetoric or his eloquent speech that impressed them. In fact, he had not even started his speech. He just uttered sisters and brothers of America. And people clapped their hands. They had not even listened to his speech. He had not even started. They had already listened to wonderful orations in the same session, the Parliament of Religion. Great divines, great scholars, theologians from different traditions came and delivered lectures, and they were highly impressed. But they didn't bother to get up from their seats and clap their hands. The reason is, Vivekananda had at one point experienced this spiritual unity of humanity. When a person who has reached this experience level put this experience into his words, then people naturally respond. But there is a invisible heart-to-heart communication line that goes beyond words and beyond rhetoric. That's why people respond. In fact, many of them did not know what he was going to talk about. None of them knew anything about Hinduism or Vedanta. They might have heard and read about Hinduism, but mostly they may have read from the books written by people who are totally unsympathetic towards these Oriental religious traditions, missionaries and others. So that they were seeing in front of them a new person in strange clothes, and he had not even started his speech, so there is no reason to argue that they were impressed by his oratory because he had not started his speech. People naturally felt that this man who addressed them as sisters and brothers really felt that they are his sisters and brothers. Now, this is the essence of interspiritual unity, interspirituality. When we reach at least when we get a glimpse of this spiritual unity of mankind, it helps us to look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family. And that's the only time when we really can consider other human beings as brothers and sisters. Otherwise, when you go to Trader Joe's, they also have a good day, great day. They will tell you. You won't be highly impressed by that. People smile at us, laugh at us, say wonderful things. They use much more sweet language perhaps than Vivekananda used. We are not very much impressed. So, when a spiritual person who has reached the spiritual level of unity of existence, unity of humanity, when he speaks, immediately there is an invisible heart-to-heart communication line that opens, and they feel that really humanity is one. That experience may not last long in their hearts, but there's an immediate effect in that. That's what Sri Ramakrishna really meant when he said that when we reach the experience level, then we look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual fraternity. Differences and conflicts may exist, but beneath and beyond these differences, we always get a glimpse of the underlying unity, the connecting thread of spiritual unity of mankind. That's what Sri Ramakrishna meant. I shall read a few more teachings from the sayings of Sri Ramakrishna. A jar kept in water is full of water inside and outside. Thus, the soul immersed in God sees the all-pervading spirit within and without. Now, when you define religion as spirituality, as spiritual experience, as experiencing the reality of the one divine principle, God, residing in all human hearts, everywhere, you recognize, you realize the immanence and also the transcendence of this reality. So God is immanent and also transcendent, and also omnipresent, all-pervading. God lives within and also without. At the beginning of our spiritual life, we may perhaps think that my God lives in my temple, and his residential address is this temple address. That's the place where he lives. If I pray to my God, he'll be very happy. But he may not be in very good terms with people who do not pray to him the same way as I do, as I pray. Now, as we evolve in spiritual life, we also start feeling the presence of the same God outside the temple. If we can feel the presence of God only in the prayer hall, meditation room, in a church or a temple alone, then we are not spiritual, but it will be helpful to us. Because first of all, we must see God somewhere. If not in our own hearts, if not in the hearts of others, we must feel his presence in a temple or a church or some place of worship. That's needed. But we should not stop there. That is only the kindergarten, the primary standard, primary school of spiritual life. As we evolve further in spiritual life, we start seeing the presence of God even outside the meditation room, even outside the temple, outside the place of worship. And at the highest experience level, we feel, not just feel, we do experience the presence of God everywhere. So to begin with, we feel the presence of God only in a place, and at the end, there is no place where God is not present. Then how can there be any wrong religion in this world? Suppose a primitive person who is not educated, who may not have read any religious sacred books, if he goes to his room and prays, if he doesn't have a room even, if he lives in the wilderness, if he goes to a forest and pray sincerely, do you think God will ask him, no, you build a church or a temple first and then pray? What happens? God opens his doors to him also. So, the real residential address of God is the human heart itself. That's what Gita says. Ishvara sarvabhudanam hridesi arjuna tishtadi brahmayan sarvabhudani yantrarudhani maya. In the 18th chapter of Gita, Lord Krishna says, he says, the residential address of God is human heart. He lives in the hearts of all beings. Not only in the hearts of believers, nor even in the hearts of non-believers. God's existence is not dependent upon our recognition that he exists. God should be very miserable if he feels totally helpless if you don't recognize him. In fact, that's why Swami Vivekananda made a very memorable statement. It's supposed to be one of the most memorable statements in the whole 9 volumes. He says, even if you do not believe in God, you live your life in such a way that if God exists, he will accept you even if you don't accept him. So God will accept us even if we don't accept him. So at the spiritual level, even the distinction, the difference between believers and non-believers, the difference between the meditation room and the open markets, these distinctions also vanish. That's why in Vedantic tradition, the highest spiritual person is one who can feel the presence of God even in a marketplace. That is true, literally true. In the Mahabharata, there's a story. One of the greatest saints, one of the greatest sages mentioned in the Mahabharata, which in one of its versions is more than 200,000 verses, but standard version is more than 100,000 verses. It's a huge work. There are hundreds of saints and sages mentioned. But one of the greatest of them, he was a butcher. His job was, every day he used to go to forests, hunt animals, bring them, cut them, and that was his job. He was a butcher by profession. His name was Vyatha. And a great mendicant who meditated for a long time, but he could not control his anger, went about, finally reached him and learned from him the highest spiritual truth. Now, what is real spirituality? The real spirituality is experience of this oneness of reality. And at this level, even the difference between religion and non-religion, the secular and spiritual, even these differences and distinctions vanish. The secular merges into the spiritual. There is no distinction between the believers and non-believers, because it is a kind of spiritual democracy, spiritual egalitarianism, a kind of universal spiritual humanism. Now, this idea, I want to emphasize again, Sri Ramakrishna preached based upon his own experience, his own inner experience. In his experience, he found any person who is sincere, honest, and truthful, belonging to any religious tradition or no religious tradition, if he loves God and prays to him, God listens to him. Language, customs, socio-anthropological factors are only secondary, are minor factors. Beyond and beneath these differences is a unity of existence. In later years, Swami Vivekananda made two unique contributions to modern religious philosophy. One was universal religion, the other was practical Vedanta. These are two of Swami Vivekananda's major contributions to world religious thought. He said universal religion is a universal approach to religious differences, which enables us to recognize the spiritual unity, the spiritual content in all religious traditions, enshrined in all sacred books. And that's the ability to look beyond the secondary details, the socio-anthropological differences in terms of customs, habits, and manners. All these are secondary. Beyond all this, there is the spiritual unity of humanity, because humanity is essentially one. And this oneness, again, is a spiritual oneness. There can be no other kinds of unity at all. In fact, then what is the reason? How do you explain these conflicts and differences? It's because every prophet has to use a language into which he is born. He brings with him the baggage of the burden of the customs and habits and circumstances, socio-anthropological factors of his own tribe or people or tradition or culture. Jesus, for example, was born in a cultural setting that was different from the cultural setting in which Buddha was born. So the language that Buddha used will be different. The habits will be different. Jesus used a pastoral setting. He was born in a pastoral setting. So his parables and teachings have a pastoral setting about it. See, the sower of the seeds, of the, all these parables have a pastoral setting, because that was the cultural surrounding in which Jesus was born. So he taught these great universal spiritual truths in the language into which he was born. Buddha was born in a different cultural setting, and he used a different language, but he taught the same universal spiritual message. But very often what happens? We don't go to the central message. We fight for the skin, for the outer shells. And therefore, we find so many conflicts in the name of God and in the name of religion. Vivekananda was the first great teacher in modern times who taught us to look beyond these differences. And Vivekananda got all that he taught from his teacher, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. And Sri Ramakrishna learned all these not by reading different religious scriptures. He knew them, or by participating in the religious dialogues, but by practicing and experiencing the truths of all these different traditions in his own inner life. And when faith and belief, rituals and ceremonies, customs and habits become experience, then they become spirituality. We never become spiritual till we get experience. We may be religious, but there is nothing wrong in being religious. We should only know that we have to go beyond that. Nothing wrong in being religious. But the moment we understand, at least intellectually, the religious diversities are the results of looking only at the outer shells, and beyond this, there is the experience level, which alone can be the fulfillment of religious life. Once we realize this truth, then we will not fight, even though we may not have experienced that truth. And that's a great contribution of Sri Ramakrishna in modern times. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.